yourself comfortable with the mic where you'd like, as long as we can hear you. Can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to provide is true and accurate? Thank you. Mr. Lewinsky.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Phillips, are you the same Andrew Phillips who caused to be filed in this matter direct and rebuttal testimony and 2 exhibits? I don't believe your microphone is on.
I am.
Thank you. And do you have any corrections to your testimony before we begin this one?
No, I don't.
And if I asked you the questions in your testimony on the stand today, would your answers be substantially similar?
Yes, they would.
Your Honor, we move admission of Phillips' direct, rebuttal, and exhibits 1 and 2.
Is there objection?
Yes, Your Honor. As to the exhibits, object, hearsay, hearsay within hearsay, lack of foundation, and relevance.
Thank you.
For all the reasons we've discussed many times, but here, since Mr. Phillips was directly involved in the study, I don't know what the objection would be. Again, technically it is hearsay because it was a statement out of court, but there are several exceptions that would apply, not least of which is the Administrative Procedures Act allowance of hearsay.
Thank you. The objection is overruled. It will be admitted as named previously. Thank you.
Your Honor, with that, we tender the witness for cross-examination.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Taylor had his tag up first.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club. And in looking at your report, if we can get that up, it would be the Phillips Exhibit 1, I think. And if you go to page 3, the executive summary, there we go. First line says, Summit Carbon Solutions commissioned Ernst & Young to analyze its economic and tax contributions from the construction and operation of its vertically integrated carbon capture, transportation, and sequestration project. So is it fair to say that your analysis only looks at economic contributions? Is that correct?
That's correct.
It doesn't consider any economic costs or detriments, correct?
That's correct.
And is it fair to say that many, if not most, of the inputs, the information you used to prepare your report came from Summit?
That's correct. We received budget information, information about employment, payroll, local suppliers, etc.
Okay. And you did nothing to verify the accuracy or the correctness of the information that Summit gave you?
For budget information related to the capital expenditure program, no. We relied on information supplied by Summit.
Okay.
For certain other parameters in the analysis, we did independently check reasonableness, but this was not in any way an audit of that information.
Right. Which brings up an interesting point. Ernst & Young, among other things, is an accounting firm, correct?
That's right.
You're not an accountant, or are you?
No.
So, if an investor were going to consider investing in Summit, the investor probably would not rely on this report entirely.
I'm not sure this report would provide any basis for an investment decision, but we would not advise anyone to rely on this report for an investment decision in Summit.
In fact, if we can go to The second page of the report, it's not numbered, but it's just after the cover page. The next page, down at the bottom, it says limitations and restrictions, and in that a disclaimer, I'll call it, it says certain analyses and findings in this report are based on estimates and or assumptions about the cost of construction and operation of the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline project. So it's based on a lot of estimates and assumptions, correct?
That's right.
Economists like to use assumptions, don't they?
And we try to state them in the report.
And farther down, it says Ernst & Young has no future obligation to update the report. And you have not updated the report, have you?
Since the report was issued about a year ago, we have received updated budget information from Summit, and we were asked to update the analysis, but we have not updated the report.
Okay.
So we do have new estimates.
But we, the public, would not have access to that updated report.
We have not yet prepared any updated report.
And this board would not have access to that.
Because we have not prepared an updated report.
And then the disclaimer goes on to say, while we, Ernst & Young, believe the work performed is responsive to Summit's request pursuant to the scope of work, we make no representation as to the sufficiency of the report or our work for any other purposes. And then the important part goes on to say, any third parties reading the report should be aware that the report is subject to limitations, and the scope of the report was not designed for use or reliance by third parties for investment purposes or any other purpose. We, Ernst & Young, assume no duty, obligation, or responsibility whatsoever to any third parties that may obtain access to the report. So you're saying there, aren't you, that anyone who wants to make a decision based on this report is advised to be very cautious about using this report to make that decision, correct?
I think the disclaimer sort of notes that, we're not liable for financial decisions that are made based on this report. We were hired to conduct a process on the data that was given to us, which was to transform the budget information into estimates of employment and economic activity.
But doesn't the disclaimer say the scope of the report was not designed for use or reliance by third parties for any purpose?
That is what the disclaimer says.
And you stick by that?
This is standard language that appears in most of our reports. We were commissioned to do this work with the understanding that it would be made public and it would be used for this purpose. Nonetheless, this is a standard disclaimer that appears in EY reports.
But the disclaimer is to warn anybody who might want to rely on this report, correct?
That is what it says.
You used a model called M-Plan. Is that correct?
That's right.
And I think you said in your rebuttal testimony at page 5 that the M-Plan model only considers positive economic impacts. Is that correct?
If you were to input a negative event, it would consider this sort of ancillary effects of that negative event. In this case, we were looking at two positive spending type impacts. One is from the construction of the pipeline and the other is from the operation of the pipeline. And given that both of those are positives, the end result is positive based on the way the plan works. Yes.
So it's not a cost-benefit analysis, is that a fair statement?
It is not a cost-benefit analysis. There are other benefits also that we did not include in this analysis, including environmental benefits. That's right.
There are any environmental impacts, adverse impacts.
That's true. We don't look at environmental issues per se in this report.
And is it fair to say that your report or your analysis is simply a prediction? You can't say that things will happen or make conclusive statements from your analysis?
It's a prediction because the pipeline hasn't been built yet.
But in your report, you repeatedly say that the project will provide so many secondary, even tertiary jobs. It will provide so much tax revenue. You know, you use the word will all the way through, even though it's a prediction. So really, would you agree that maybe will was not the proper word to use?
One could say is expected to, or is projected to, or is estimated to.
Wouldn't that be
substitutes for will?
Yeah, wouldn't that be more accurate?
I'm not sure. I think the purpose was to convey the result in the report, whether it's will or is expected to or estimated to. I would leave it to the reader to sort of know that this is a projection.
As you said, the report doesn't look at negative impacts. For example, we've heard testimony that this project may increase the price of corn, but that would make it more expensive for livestock producers to buy feed for their animals. And would you agree the livestock industry is an important economic aspect of Iowa's economy?
As you noted, it's not something that we looked at in the report.
So that could be a negative impact from this project that doesn't appear in the report.
In the example you just provided, there were two impacts you mentioned. There's a positive impact for corn producers and a potential secondary negative impact for livestock producers. And what the net of those two would be, I don't know, because it wasn't something we looked at in the report.
Either way.
Either way.
We've also heard testimony that an important aspect economically of the Summit project are the 45Q and 45Z tax credits. Are you familiar with those?
Yes.
And I think your report specifically said that you were not factoring those into your analysis, correct?
The amount of the credit is included in the report. From the perspective of Iowa economic impact, other than making the project more financially feasible, there's no impact from that credit that we would have estimated.
Is a part of your analysis what you would consider indirect and induced jobs from the Summit project?
Yes.
For the record, explain what you mean by indirect and induced jobs.
So indirect jobs relate to supply chain related activity, where to the extent Summit has purchases from in-state suppliers of goods or services. Those purchases then support some amount of additional in-state activity, employment, GDP, and otherwise. The induced economic impact is related to employee respending of income within the state economy, and that employee income includes both the direct employees, meaning Summit employees in Iowa, as well as indirect employees, meaning employees of vendors, contractors, and suppliers.
And in your report, you don't distinguish full-time jobs from part-time jobs when you're considering indirect and induced jobs. Is that correct?
That's correct. The employment numbers are based on an average number of hours worked, which is a mix based on industry averages between full-time and part-time.
But wouldn't full-time jobs be more economically beneficial to the economy than part-time jobs?
If you have the same number of them.
We've heard testimony in this case about the alleged impact on the ethanol industry in Iowa. And if we can go back to page 3 of your report. And scroll down just a little bit, right there. The very last sentence in the first paragraph says the project will reduce the carbon footprint of ethanol production and enhance the long-term economic viability of the ethanol, agricultural, and other industries. But as near as I could tell, after making that statement, there's nothing in the report that analyzes the impact on the ethanol industry. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the board would not have the benefit of your analysis regarding the ethanol industry and the economic impacts, correct?
That's correct.
We've heard from some landowners that they had investment plans that they have put on hold or maybe even abandoned because of this project. Did you figure any of that into your analysis?
No, we did not. We did not have that information, and it wasn't part of our approach.
And we've heard testimony about the impacts of the construction and perhaps operation of the pipeline on farmland and reduced crop yields. Did you factor any of that into your analysis?
No, we're just looking at the spending impacts from construction and operation. I should note the other thing we're not factoring in are the payments to landowners.
Okay, thank you. In your rebuttal testimony at page 4, starts at line 7. I'm sorry, starts at line 8. You say, however, due to the increased length of the project, average annual jobs have decreased 42%. So doesn't that indicate that the economic the contribution, in terms of jobs at least, has decreased?
No.
Why not?
Because you're supporting half as many jobs for twice as long, essentially. So in terms of the overall contribution to labor in Iowa, it's roughly the same.
Okay. So for those workers who were 50% of the original jobs who won't have a job now, if I understand your testimony correctly, that's quite an impact to them, isn't it?
Yes, and it's offset by the other half of the workers that now get to work twice as many years.
Well, if I understood you correctly, you're going to have fewer workers. They're just going to work longer, right?
They're going to have jobs for roughly 6 years instead of roughly 3 years. Yeah.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah.
We're at noon. I don't want to interrupt you, so we can.
That's fine. Yeah, we can break.
Is it a good time?
Yes.
Okay, very good. We'll take a quick